You are listening to Prophet Pearls with Nehemia Gordon and Keith Johnson, exploring biblical prophecy for yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
Shalom, Chaverim Shalanu. You guys already know what that means. It's peace to you, our friends. In Hebrew, this is Keith Johnson with Nehemia Gordon, ready to take another peek into the prophets to see if we can find some pearls to share with you. Shalom, Chaver Shali Ata Mukhan. Are you ready?
Ani Mukhan, Keith. I am ready to plunge down deep into the water, into the depths to find the pearls.
Hey, that's exactly what we're going to do. It's really I love these stories. You know, I'm a Bible story reading pastor. That's just the bottom line. So whenever we get to a story, I always get real excited. But we're going to be reading a story today that is really well known. A lot of people know about it. It's funny, Nehemia. There's a lot of stories in Scripture that I'll mention to people that have even been long-term people in the church, and they won't know anything about the story. And I've always been surprised by that. But then when I think about what's happening in most churches on Sunday morning, they did a survey not long ago that said that most preachers don't even preach out of the Gospels as much, but they mostly preach from the letters of Paul. And you think about that, there's something like 80% or something. And that the Old Testament, quote unquote, is used for the really well-known stories like, you know, Noah and the Ark and Adam and Eve. But a story like this is so crucial to understanding. And I think a lot of it just has to do, for me, what I call, again, is context. And we actually addressed the first part of this story. We didn't get to this part. The first part of this story where David was on his deathbed. You remember we did that, that Prophet Pearls. If you have not heard the entire series so far, you really should take a Sabbath and just sit down and listen. I think it really gives people a great chance to kind of understand those passages that aren't so popular. There aren't ones that are at least preached in the tradition I come from. You heard these passages every year. I mean,
well, you know, having said that, you know, I was having a conversation. You know, a lot of times what Orthodox Jews will do, and not just Orthodox Jews, Jews in general, is these things will be read in the synagogue, and they're read in Hebrew. And even if you're a Hebrew speaker, it's not the Hebrew you speak. It's you know, the old Hebrew. So it's like, you know, imagine if your pastor got up, and started reading from the King James, so you might zone out.
Yeah.
And I was actually speaking to this Orthodox Jew, someone's very close to me, and when we were talking, I said something about Yiftach, which in Hebrew is Jephthah, and I could tell from the look in his face he didn't know who Jephthah was. And I said, "Have you ever read the book of Judges?" And he said, I don't read Scripture, I study it. I said, "Oh, okay, smarty pants." Have you ever studied the book of Judges? And this was a man who was he was a gabbai. He was the I don't know what you call that in English. It's like the beadle of the synagogue. Meaning he ran all the administrative side of the synagogue. Mm-hmm. And for example, if someone was going to read from the prophets portion, he would assign that to someone to read. And there is a prophets portion on Jephthah, but he had never studied it. He had never paid attention to what was being read, even though he assigned the portion, and literally didn't know the story.
Okay, so then that kind of happens in both cases.
Yeah,
Another
in
thing
both
I would tell you that I
traditions,
didn't understand, this was a long time ago in Nehemia, it was 2002 when I went to Israel. I would ask someone about, and these are Jewish people that I would be talking to, and I would ask them about something, you know, well, how do you read this passage, or how do you see this passage? And there were a lot of people that I met that actually, I just kind of thought that they would be always opening up the Tanakh and reading it. Instead, it was they were in the synagogue, they were hearing it read, there was sort of the things that they were doing from a religious standpoint, but in terms of having the available Bible that's sitting around that they would open up, a lot of them didn't. And then the other thing that surprised me is how many rabbis that were primarily, it seemed as though they were studying the oral law, the Mishnah, and those kinds of things. And that was surprising for me.
Yeah, and that's actually changing even in the Orthodox Jewish world. But historically, and really even in some circles today, rabbis will study Talmud and they will not study the Tanakh. They may actually read through it, but they're not actually paying attention to what they're reading. Yeah, and you know they're kind of like doing their duty and, you know, getting through the portions. And so what we really want to challenge people to do is to stop and listen and think about, what is it that we've just read? What does this mean? What does it mean in its context? And, you know, it's real tragic. So the Talmud will talk about a certain verse, and they'll know that verse, and they'll know every letter of the verse. But what does it say one verse before, one verse after? They've got no idea because they never bothered looking.
Sounds familiar. Well, can we jump right in here? We're dealing in 1 Kings chapter 3. And what's really interesting about the portion is we start in verse, I think it's 15.
Yeah.
We start in verse 15, but there's no way you can start in 15.
You can't do it. You got to go to verse 1.
You got to go to verse 1. And so let's do this. I'll have you read first. Why don't you take a stab at the first part of it for context, and then I'll add a little bit.
And let's just give the so basically the section we're talking about is the famous story. This you got to know, even if you've been falling asleep in your synagogue or churches. That these two women come before, and we'll talk more detail. These two women come before Solomon, and there's a dispute whose baby it is, and he says, "Okay, cut the baby in half." And
giving away the story before.
Okay, no. So I want to give the context.
Well, we're about to give him the context.
No, so I'm giving the context of the context. so Solomon knows who's the real mother. Because she says, no, give it to the other woman. Don't cut the baby in half.
You remind me of the people that would go and watch a movie, and I'd say, I really got to go see that movie. And they'd say, oh, it's a great...
Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert!
It's a great movie. There's this part where you think it's him, and it's, what are you doing? Let's go to the... I'll take over from here.
Hold on
1 Kings chapter 3.
So why is the context important? Because this story of the two women and the baby is an illustration of Solomon's wisdom as a judge. Mm-hmm. Well... What we're about to read is where Solomon gets his wisdom from.
Right. Absolutely.
That's what's important here.
Go ahead and read that.
Okay. All right. So we're going to, all right. Now I wonder if there's different verse numbers in the English because in Hebrew, it's the same verse number. So really it starts in verse 2, not in verse 1.
Okay.
Verse 1 is about Solomon marrying the daughter of Pharaoh. Nothing to do with our story. Okay. And let's see, verse 2. I'll read the JPS. The people, however, continued to offer sacrifices it says in the JPS the open shrines, but that's misleading. It's the high places. Mm-hmm. Because up to that time, no house had been built for the name of Jehovah. Mm-hmm. You don't get excited by that, Keith. And Solomon, or Shlomo in Hebrew, Shlomo, though he loved Jehovah and followed the practices of his father David, also sacrificed and offered at the Bamot, at the high places. Mm-hmm. The king went to Gibeon, to sacrifice there, for that was the largest Bamah. On that altar, Solomon presented 1,000 burnt offerings. Mm-hmm. At Gibeon, Jehovah appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask what shall I grant you?" And Shlomo said, You dealt most graciously with your servant my father David, because he walked before you in faithfulness and righteousness and in integrity of heart. You have continued this great kindness to him by giving him a son to occupy his throne, as is now the case. And now, O Jehovah, my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, but I am a young lad with no experience in leadership. Your servant finds himself in the midst of the people you have chosen, a people too numerous to be numbered or counted. Grant then your servant an understanding mind to judge your people, to distinguish between good and bad, for who can judge this vast people of yours? Mm-hmm. Jehovah was pleased that Solomon asked for this. And God said to him, because you asked for this, you did not ask for long life, you did not ask for riches, you did not ask for life of your enemies, but you asked for discernment in dispensing justice. I now do as you have spoken. I grant you a wise and discerning mind. There has never been anyone like you before, nor will anyone like you arise again. And I also grant you what you did not ask for, both riches and glory all your life, the life of which no king has ever had. And I will further grant you long life if you will walk in my ways and observe my laws and commandments as your father David, as did your father David. And now begins our section, which is really in the middle of a thought. It's actually the end of this section. Mm-hmm. Then Shlomo awoke. It was a dream. He went to Jerusalem, stood before the Ark of the Covenant of Jehovah.
So wait, so you don't have a comment about the context?
Oh, I have lots of comments.
Comments.
So one of the things that's really exciting about Kings is that there's a parallel in Chronicles. Mm-hmm. And you cannot read Kings really completely without looking at the parallel in Chronicles. And this is 2 Chronicles chapter 1, mm-hmm. Verses 1 to 13. And we won't read the whole thing, but I will bring some of the interesting... One of the controversies... So it says there's these high places where he went to sacrifice, and, mm-hmm. and they're forbidden to sacrifice at the high places. Mm-hmm. Where do we know about that? From Leviticus 17 and Deuteronomy 12. That you're forbidden to sacrifice at the high places. But then 2 Chronicles throws a what do they call it, a monkey wrench in the works?
Yeah.
And let's look at that real quick. So basically the same thing happens. They go to the Bamah, and it says, verse 3 of 2 Chronicles 1, Then Solomon and all the assemblage with him went to the shrine, and again it's Bamah in Hebrew, went to the Bamah, the high place at Gibeon, and it says, for the tent of meeting which Moses the servant of Jehovah had made in the wilderness was there. Mm-hmm. And then it says in verse 4, But the ark of God David had brought up from Kiryat Yearim to the place which David had prepared for it, for he had pitched a tent for it in Jerusalem. So we've got this split. The Ark of the Covenant, the Aron, is in Jerusalem in a tent. And the tent of meeting, the Ohel Moed that Moses made, is in Givon and Gibeon at a high place. Now, wait a minute. Many people will tell you, and this isn't such a crazy assumption, that the Ohel Moed, the tent of the meeting, was destroyed after the Battle of Afek. That's the story where the ark was taken, and Eli, was sitting on the chair, and he fell back and broke his neck. And then the next thing we hear is in Jeremiah about how God abandoned the tabernacle of Shiloh, So wait a minute, but it survived Shiloh and was brought to, or at least something of it survived and was brought to Givon, to Gibeon. And then it goes on in verse 5, and it says, the bronze altar which Bezalel the son of Uri, son of Hur, had made was also there before the tabernacle of Yehovah. And Solomon and the assemblage resorted to it. There Solomon assembled the bronze altar before Yehovah, which was at the tent of meeting, and on it sacrificed 1,000 burnt offerings. What on earth is going on? The way it sounded in Kings is that Solomon was sinning because he was sacrificing at the Bamot. It says he followed Yehovah, except he did this one thing. And here it's like this little piece of information which is confusing. The altar of Bezalel from the book of Exodus was there, and the tent of the meeting that Moses made. So what's going on?
I mean, the thing that personally, when I was reading that, I thought to myself, wow, Solomon is trying, and I think the key for me was when we read a little bit further in the beginning of the context, but Solomon is trying to do what he thinks he's supposed to do. Right. So whether this was what everyone did before, or this is the place to go, what's interesting about it is when he says this, if we can go to this, in 3 verse 2, I'm sorry.
In which chapter are you?
I'm sorry, Kings? In 1 Kings 3.
Yeah.
And it says, now Solomon, and this is, I'm reading from the NASB here, we can also check the Hebrew. Now Solomon loved Yehovah, walking in the statutes of his father David, except...
Exactly.
He
meaning it's clearly a sin. There's no question about
right.
it. And here's the really shocking thing that we get from Chronicles and taking it together with Kings. The tabernacle of Moses was there. The altar of Bezalel, the son of Uri from the book of Exodus, was there. But it was still a sin to sacrifice there. Because God had said, only at the place where I put my name. And where his name was put is at the ark.
Yes,
and the ark was in Jerusalem.
Amen.
And so even though it had all the trappings, I mean, people there could say, but Moses built this. You're going to bring me a verse from Leviticus 17 and Deuteronomy 12? Like, what are you talking about? Moses built this tabernacle. And Bezalel, who had the wisdom, he also had the wisdom of Yehovah put in his heart. He built this altar, but it was still a sin. And what really is amazing to me about this whole story is Yehovah still accepted his sacrifice. Well, Yehovah still, came to him and spoke to him. Didn't say, "Okay, now I cast you out. You're evil. You're going to hell," because you didn't do all the stipulations that you're supposed to do, and you did sin. Okay, I'm acknowledging that, but you love Yehovah and your heart's in the right place. Wow, is Yehovah amazing?
So it says here that and I, Nehemia, I don't know about the issue of whether he accepted the sacrifice or not. We know that he showed up.
He responded. Yeah.
Well, it says that he appeared to him in a dream at night, and God said, "Ask what you wish me."
I want to dwell on this just for one more minute, because a lot of people I interact with today, I call them they're the Shabbat police or the Torah police. That we have this phrase in Hebrew. They're gonna be checking your tzitzit. You're checking your fringes to make sure that they're according to all the stipulations, and if the tzitzit checkers or the Torah police had shown up here, they would have said, "Whoa, God, you can't be talking to Solomon. He just sinned."
Yeah.
And instead, Yehovah said, "I'm bigger than what you think I am."
Yeah, I mean, but and again, the point is that he met with him. And then I think the thing that kind of threw me, that I like if I can go to 1 Kings 3:6, it says, "Then Solomon said, 'You've shown great loving kindness to your servant David.'" That's a statement that we can go and look further into. "According as he walked before you in truth and righteousness and uprightness of heart toward you, and you have reserved for him this great loving kindness." He says, "You have made your servant king in place of my father David. Yet," and then in different phrases it says it yet, but in the NASB it says yet, "but I am a little child." And this is something that really caught my attention, because we don't know exactly how old Solomon was. No one can say. In Kings 14 verse 5, it says Solomon was 12. Not like,
Well, but look,
where it said, hold on. Thank you. So anyways, it doesn't say exactly how old he is. We don't have that like we have statements over and over in Kings. So-and-so was this age, so-and-so was this age, so-and-so was this age. With Solomon, We don't get an age, but we get this phrase that he was I think it is Na'ar Katon. Yeah, so he's a small child, little child, etc. We don't know how old he is. And then this small child, however old he is, prays this prayer. Mm-hmm. And the reason this caught me is because when he says that, he says, I'm in the midst of your people and have chosen a great people. He says, so give your servant, in English it says an understanding heart. But what it says in Hebrew, it says to give your servant a heart, a lev shomea, a heart that's almost like a heart that's listening. Mm-hmm. You know, the idea that Solomon is at this young age saying, okay, I don't know it all. What if more people did this? I don't know it all. I'm in a process. I love you. I definitely love you. But I don't know it all, and I really need your help. And so I want to listen. And I don't know what it is about this. It's like a heart that's listening versus a heart that's speaking. He's basically saying, here I am, speak to me and I'll do it. It's like my heart is ready. It's attentive. Mm-hmm. It's ready to be, it's ready. And then of course he prays this prayer. He says, who's able to judge this great people of yours? It was pleasing. What was pleasing? That he asked this thing. And what thing did he ask? That his heart would listen? Yeah. I mean, I think, even as we do these prophet pearls, we don't know it all. We might have our computers. I mean, I think, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 books and computers. And even at David's prayer, he says, open my eyes that I might, what?
Yeah, that I might see
these wonderful things. Yeah. And here his son comes along and he says, may my heart listen. Yeah. And really that's where what I love about doing these studies is that here's this young child, however old he is, that knew how he knew this to pray this prayer. Yeah. We don't know how he knew it, but he prayed it. And then God answered that prayer. So that was the thing that really...
Yeah, and about his age, I mean, I don't know that we can really assume that he's, 12. Because,
we don't know.
Because, think about it. In the U.S. Constitution, the president doesn't have to be 45 years old to be president. Mm. So imagine you're king of Israel. Maybe I'm 41 years old, mm-hmm. and I feel like Solomon. I'm a young man. I'm a young boy, mm-hmm. and there's a lot I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. So the thing that it goes on in verse 3:14 before we get to verse 15, and this mm-hmm. is the other thing, the connection with what you just said. He says, "If you walk in my ways," boy, that sounds familiar. If mm-hmm. you walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and commands as your father David walked, then I will prolong your days. And of course, you can read what those statutes are, and over mm-hmm. and over again, he'll talk about. Doing this prolongs your days. Honoring your father and mother prolongs your days. Doing this, over and over. Then it says, and then this is the verse that I like, and this is the beginning of the actual portion, 3:15. If you guys, I hope you got your Bibles open, at least more than one, because you got to catch up to us here. Then Solomon awoke, and behold, it was a dream, and then he came to Jerusalem and stood before the ark. And then what does he do? He offers more burnt offerings and makes peace offerings. And then in English,
did you say pizza offerings?
It says peace offerings.
Pizza offerings. You went to Pizza Hut?
Yeah. And made a feast for all his servants. And some people, I just want to stop right here, and I want to be not taking a deeper look. It would be really easy if when you see the word feast, you could think, oh, this must be one of the feasts. You could do a whole message and say this. Maybe this is one of the feasts. In fact, the word is it's not one of the feasts, but it's an example where the same word can be used but two different meanings. Feast of the Lord. What is the Hebrew word behind that? And the feast here.
Oh, you're doing the word mishteh?
Yeah, mishteh. No, I'm saying that's an example.
Is not a moed.
Exactly.
Moed is appointed time. Exactly. Chag is a pilgrimage festival.
Yep.
This is mishteh, different word altogether. It means there's a drinking party.
Yeah, absolutely. So they're having a time. But he says he stood before the ark. Now, I want to stop there because let's just talk just for a second about the significance.
Can you read the whole phrase?
Yeah, go ahead.
The ark of the Aron Brit Adonai, the ark of the covenant of the Lord. It actually does say there, Lord. Adonai.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does say Adonai. Yeah. So here you have the ark place. This. I don't even know how to. I honestly don't even know how to start talking about it.
Well, I think it's interesting. Before he got the divine wisdom, he went and he offered offerings at Gibeon. Mm-hmm. And after he got the divine wisdom, he said, "Oh, maybe I need to go to Jerusalem and offer these offerings,"
which I think is also a part. We call it the joy of the journey, and the joy of the journey says. God meets Solomon as a young, whatever the age is, he meets him at this place.
41.
Whatever it is, and he brings him to the next place. And I think that's another picture that I like about this story is that that our Father in heaven would meet him at a high place and then bring him to this place. And then we get a chance to see what happens. So if you want to, Nehemia, we can get right into this.
I'm not done with Solomon.
Yeah, no,
so he's the wise. I think we really, the story is a great story, and everybody knows the story. Come on, and we'll talk about the details.
A lot of people don't know the story. We're going to tell the story.
But I want to talk about why it was so important for him to ask to be for wisdom, and it wasn't just wisdom. Let's go back to the exact verse, which is I think verse 9.
Yep.
It says, and may you give to your servant a listening heart, and it says lishpot, to judge your people, to discern between good and evil, or literally to know between good and evil, to understand between good and evil, because who can judge this heavy people? Literally says.
People, yeah.
So judge. We have an American law, and I say American because that's where I grew up. We have this concept of the separation of powers. And we have, and it's funny, I asked my Chinese students, do you know how does the American government work? And they said, there's 3 sections. And they actually knew this. They said there's the legislature, the judiciary, and the executive. And I said, how does your government work? And they said, we have no idea. They literally said that. But so everyone knows this, even Chinese people. The American has 3, and there's separation of powers, and each is separate. Well, in biblical Israel, it wasn't quite so simple. Meaning the main function of the king after ruling, one of his main functions was to be a judge. And that actually goes back way back, and I just want, if we can spend a couple minutes on this, I think it's really important that the role of the king of Israel is to be a judge and to be a righteous judge, and that's really what he was asking, to have the discernment to be a righteous judge. Deuteronomy 17 talks about if you don't know what to do in a matter of judgment, you go up to the temple and you can ask two different groups of people there. One is the Levitical priests, and the other is the judge. And it actually says Hashofet, the judge. He's the high judge. He is the head of the Supreme Court. We see in the book of Judges, there's a whole era of judges. And we have judges like who is the top judge in all of Israel. And that judge is also a leader by default, meaning that's the Hebrew thinking. A judge, the high judge, is a leader. So we have, we have Jephthah, and we have a whole bunch of judges, Gideon, and anyway, the era of judges gives way to the era of kings, and explicitly, the people come and they say, "Look, this judge system, we're not happy with it. We want a commander in chief to come and be our king and also judge." And that's exactly what they say to Saul. In this is in 1 Samuel chapter 8 verse 5. It says they said to him, "You have grown old to." Sorry, this is not Saul. It's Samuel, the prophet. And they said to Samuel, "You have grown old, and your sons have not followed your ways. Therefore, appoint a king for us." And then the JPS says to govern us like all the other nations. But in the Hebrew, it doesn't say govern us. It says to judge us like all the nations. So the role of the king is to be a judge, and that's what he's thinking. And then one more verse, which I think is a really important one. It's talking about the future King Messiah. May he come soon and bring world peace. Isaiah chapter 11. Can we read that one? All right, Isaiah 11, I'll read it in the JPS. "But a shoot shall grow out of the stump of Jesse, a twig shall sprout from his stalk," a very famous passage. "The spirit of Jehovah shall alight upon him, a spirit of wisdom and insight, a spirit of counsel and valor, a spirit of devotion and reverence for Jehovah." Then verse 3, "He shall sense the truth by his reverence for Jehovah. He shall not judge by what his eyes behold, nor decide by what his ears perceive. Thus he shall judge the poor with equity." Remember, this isn't the head of the Supreme Court. This is the King of Israel, who's going to reign on the throne and rule the entire world. But one of his main functions will be to judge. He will judge the poor with equity and decide with justice for the lowly of the land. He shall strike down a land with the rod of his mouth and slay the wicked with the breath of his lips. Justice shall be the girdle of his loins, and faithfulness the girdle of his waist, etc. It said, the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, etc. Okay, so we have this image of the king as a judge, and I think when we read this story about Solomon, we can think about Solomon. But can I say this, that he's a type of the Messiah? He is a Messiah, but he's the type of the future Messiah, the from the line of David.
And that's what we read earlier. We were talking about the line of David, and that was, I think it was almost three episodes ago. So if people didn't get a chance to listen to that, they can actually go to that Prophet Pearls. Do you have that verse, Nehemia, off the top of your head?
Which one?
The Prophet Pearls that we read about David. It was in 1 Kings chapter 1. The 1 Kings chapter 1 is where we were talking about David and how this whole thing's set up for Solomon to be the king.
In there somewhere.
Yes, it's 1 Kings chapter 1. Okay, so now the here comes the circumstance, the situation.
Yeah, now the actual story.
The story that you say everyone knows, that we don't need to read it then. No, of
I
course,
say we don't
a lot of people don't know it.
I'm just saying,
so here we go.
I think it's as important to get the context
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
the story itself.
I'm 100% with you on that. 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 16. Yeah. And then it says, and then two women, and it says who were harlots in the NAS translation.
And it says in Hebrew, zonot. They're prostitutes.
Yes, the prostitutes, it says there. You know what's really interesting, Nehemia? There's sometimes where you'll read something in Scripture, and I know there are different historic people that will do translation or interpretations, and it was really, really interesting. There was an interpretation that these weren't actually harlots.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and the interpretation was that they were. No, listen. And the interpretation was
just says they were.
Well, here's what the issue was. The issue was whether or not harlots, actual prostitutes, would be able to go before the king, before the righteous king, and come in with this issue. So the issue was they were trying to figure out how to get around it. So can I give you one of the interpretations?
Sure, I haven't heard this.
So one of the interpretations is no, they weren't actually prostitutes. They were actually people who were what do they call it? Tavern runners. They're running the tavern.
Oh,
yes, you know about this. Okay,
yeah, that I'm familiar with.
Okay, you are. So
well, I know.
So you're sandbagging us.
No,
you know that there's a tradition where there's a different interpretation.
Wherever there's a prostitute you want to say is righteous, in some of the Jewish sources, they'll say she was a pundakait.
That's right.
Which is a tavern.
So, folks, here's what's happening here. I'm trying to draw him out.
For example, Rahab, the prostitute, they'll say that. She was just an innkeeper. That's really the word, innkeeper.
Yeah. And so the point is, they were saying, well, no, the husbands were gone. They got in a situation. These were actually two innkeepers. Let's just go with the word.
Right. Well, but why? And here's where they're getting it. In the Aramaic translation, it does say for Rahab that she was a pundakait, an innkeeper. But that's because it was kind of like in the Old West, where the inn was also the brothel. Because where else do you have a bed that you can rent by the hour? So that's in the inn. But no, these obviously are prostitutes, and Rahab was a prostitute, and that was the whole point of the story. Yeah. But I think the point of them being prostitutes here is that even these lowly prostitutes can get justice from the king.
And so that's what happens. They come before, and one woman says, "Oh, my lord, this woman and I live in the same house, and I gave birth to a child while she was in the house. It happened on the third day." I could do a sermon on this. It happened on the third day I gave birth, that this woman also gave birth to a child. And we were together. There was no stranger. She makes sure to let you know the circumstance. There was no other person in the house. Only the two of us in the house. This woman's son died in the night because she laid on it. So she arose in the middle of the night and took my son from beside me while your maidservant slept, and laid him in her bosom, and laid her dead son in my bosom. And then 3:21, if I can continue. When I arose in the morning to nurse my son, behold, he was dead. But when I looked at him carefully in the morning, behold, he was not my son, whom I had born. You know, it's really interesting when I read that. When I read that, and this is what happens for me. I try to slow down in passages and get the picture that's happening here. So the picture is maybe it's early in the morning. Those women who nurse their children, sometimes they wake up at 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the morning, and it's you can't see. So she's trying to nurse the child. She comes to find out that the child is dead. But then later, she looks in the light of day, and she says, "Wait." I mean, so maybe at first, when this happens, she's thinking, "My son is dead." Because she can't see him. It's not like you can just flip a light on, where they're living. I mean, so they say it's dark. Children, I don't know if you know this, these children, they wake up like 4 o'clock. They wake up at nighttime.
It's so immature of them.
So they wake up at nighttime. So she's feeding her child. Maybe it's the time that she's doing this. And then when the morning light comes, she notices this is not her son. So it says, "Behold, he was not my son whom I had born." Then the other woman, now this is where things get interesting. The other woman comes in and begins to do her thing. 3:22. And I think I mean, I shouldn't say I like, but I mean, the way that this is, I'm trying to scroll at the same time. And the other woman, she said, "No, for the dead one is your son, and the living one is my son." Thus they spoke before the king. And so we have a legitimate argument happening before the king. And
remember, they don't have DNA tests, so there's no way. Yeah, there's no scientific way to determine.
And there are no witnesses. They can't. There's no father that can come in to talk. To talk on one's behalf or the other's behalf, or whoever.
because the father doesn't even know he has a child.
But who knows? Yeah, who knows? But one of the things that came to me was this. I was thinking about, so what is this happening? So you have the one who's coming to bring her case. Then you have the other one that's saying, hastily, I'm going to bring my case. I thought immediately of Proverbs 25:8. It says, do not go out hastily to argue your case. Otherwise, what will you do in the end when your neighbor humiliates you? In other words, she's coming and she's saying, look, I'm ready to bring my case. The other one's going to bring her case. They're battling back and forth before the king. Now, I don't know what you would do, but for me, I would think, let me bring this down to one of the lower judges. Meaning, in other words,
and maybe it did go to one of the lower judges, and they said we don't know what to do, and it ended up at the king. I mean, we don't know the background of the case.
It's amazing.
And how it ended up at Solomon.
Yeah, it's amazing. So when this actually happens, then again, the unless you want to say anything about the yeah.
So when I read this, here's where my rabbinical background and culture comes in. The first thing that I think when I read it, and how far did you get there?
Only this is just the end of the story of them talking. You can.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So actually, let's finish the story, and I'll tell you the rabbinical background because it immediately pops into my head, and it's obviously based on this story. And I would venture to say I'm going to share it. So there's a section that every Orthodox Jewish male studies in the Talmud, and it's the beginning of the tractate of Baba Metzia in the Talmud, and it has to do and it's actually something that I had to memorize as a child. This is one of the only passages in the Talmud that I actually it was several pages. But
how old were you when you had to memorize it?
Oh, I think I was like in 4th grade or 5th grade, something like that. And it starts out Shnayim ochazim b'talit ze omer ani matzatia v'ze omer ani matzatia ze omer kula sheli v'ze omer kula sheli ze yesheva she'en lo pachot michetzia v'ze yesheva she'en lo pachot michetzia v'yachaloku ze omer etc. I can show off and go on, but isn't that amazing that what is it over 20 years later? Oh my gosh, am I that old? And I still remember this. Yeah. And it really is. It's a section about two people walk into the court and they're both holding on to a talit, which is the garment. That's the main garment people wore. And one says, I found it. And the other says, I found it. In other words, they're not claiming prior ownership. And then the person who found it, it's his, if there's no owner. And so then says, all of it's mine. The other says, all of it's mine. And one has to swear, they basically come before the court, and the court figures out how do we do it. And in the end, the court decides we split it in half. And they obviously got this from Solomon. And what they did is they took the principle in the story of Solomon, and they've now applied it. Now, the interesting thing is, if you come from the rabbinical perspective, you get a different answer here. You say, oh, wait a minute. That's why Solomon was going to cut it in half, because he knew the Talmudic tractate of Baba Metzia.
Oh, come on.
And this is what the rabbis will tell you. No, this is what they say. And so just like the talit was cut in half, he was going to cut the baby in half. Or it's actually the other way around.
So they'd say
Solomon knew the Talmud. That's what they'll tell you.
So can I segue here? There's
sure.
this concern that I have sometimes. I think I brought it up a little bit earlier. I never memorized that tractate. I never knew anything about it.
Memorized the Epistle of James instead.
I memorized the Epistle of James. But what's interesting is that sometimes there's an assumption that for those who do have access to the Talmud and the Mishnah and those kinds of things, that their answer, because it will be at the deeper level, will be the right level.
Oh, that's why Solomon was going to cut the baby in half, because that's what you do with the talit.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah. No, and so the reason I bring this up, though, that makes me a little bit sad, is that we have this ability to get to the scripture and to see it in the original language and history and context, and then there's always I won't call it a shortcut. I would just say another way around it, a man's interpretation. And so when in this interpretation, sometimes it can go so far and so far off what the original purpose of the scripture is. And again, that's where I get so concerned when people tend to push that. And can I say this? This is probably going to get me in a lot of trouble. When they say, well, look, we have access to the rabbi, and the rabbi's got the rabbinic interpretation, so therefore we know we're right now.
Right.
And then I've sat down with some rabbis, and actually the blessing of it is been able to talk about passages in language, history, and context, and I've had rabbis say, you know what, I didn't think of it that way, because I've been so conditioned to read, this is the oral tradition, this is the rabbinic tradition. So it's something that I want people to be aware of.
And imagine my background, so I know this section by heart. But maybe I don't know the section in Kings by heart, and I'm sitting there in the synagogue, bored out of my mind, and they're reading the prayers, and I open up the Haftarah, the prophet's portion, and I say, oh wow, wow, he thought he was going to apply the law of a talit, when really, come on, in fact, it was the exact opposite, meaning he came up with this, and that's why he's so smart. They say the really brilliant things in history are the things that you look back and you say those things were obvious. And so Solomon came up, it's like like a lot of things Einstein said, we look back and say, oh yeah, well, why didn't somebody think of that before that? And so that was the brilliance of Solomon, that he came up with something that afterwards you can look back and say that was so obvious. And here's a really powerful example, I think, where the Jewish history, language, and context isn't the original biblical history, language, and context. That Jewish tradition has taken this biblical concept and this biblical story and derived something from it, which is wonderful. But then to take that derivative and read it back into the original is a complete distortion of the biblical story.
And with that, we'll move on.
Yeah,
if that's okay.
Sure.
So we have this story, Nehemia. We've got them battling back and forth, and then we get to this sentence of the king, and he says, Solomon says that in verse number, let's see if I can get there real quick, verse number 23. Okay?
Yeah.
Verse number 23. Then the king said, he kind of repeats them. The one says, this is my son who is living, and your son is the dead one. And the other one says, no, for your son is the dead one, and my son is the living one. The king then said, get me a sword. And at this point, that's the game is about to change. Because he says, get me a sword, and I get you a sword. What do you mean? So they brought a sword before the king. The king said, and if you could read this in the Hebrew, I think it would be really nice. Just act like you're Solomon, okay? I want you to be Solomon for a minute, and I want you to quote what Solomon said when he said it.
And the king said, Gizru et hayeled achai l'shnayim, utnu et hachetzi la'achat, v'et hachetzi la'achat. Cut the living child into two, and give half to one and half to one.
Now, let me go ahead and tell you what I really want to say.
What's that?
I feel like I hear these words today.
Oh, really?
I feel like when I hear Solomon say that, I hear these words from many leaders around the United States and the world that literally say this. One says it's theirs, and the other one says it's theirs. So here's what we're going to do. Let's come up with a two-state solution. Let's cut the baby in half. You have your half, you have your half. And in fact, what they're really saying, and I want to give a little promo here, because when I read this story, Nehemia, I've read this story all the time, but I was really this year, I've really been struck by what's happening, and I've kind of stayed out of it, but I've really been struck by what's happening in the land of Israel regarding the politics of the land of Israel, and specifically when it comes to what I call the cut the baby in half idea, that somehow let's just have you take this part and have you take this part. The simple solution, you do this over here, you do this over here, and everybody will be fine. When in fact, what I believe is happening is they're killing the baby. The baby, if I can use this carefully, the baby is Israel. Okay, this is the living baby, and there's someone who has birthrights to the living to Israel, and then there's others who would say, look, we may not have birthrights, but this is our land too. Now that sounds like a simple parallel, but I want to bring this up because I've really been struggling with, specifically I've been struggling with the United States' position regarding Israel and the simple answers that keep coming out. 1960. We can talk about this. I mean, this. I actually think there's room to talk about this. Israel does what it does, gets attacked, tries to defend itself, gets attacked, tries to defend itself, and then you've got sort of these people on the outside who come up with these simple answers. Well, you know what? Just go back to the 1967 lines. Just do this. Go back. And what it always ends up doing is it doesn't bring life to the people, even in Israel. In my humble opinion, it actually brings death. And I think staying on that, and that, if the story ended right here, if the story ended right here, people could say, well, Keith, you've gone too far. But what do we find in the story? We find out that by asking the question, who loves the land? And I would say something. Now, I want you to challenge me. I feel like sometimes, and maybe we should get to the verse, but that even the present, many Jews in Israel would say, well, okay, rather than causing, major issues, let's keep giving, let's keep doing, we want to keep, there's just more and more, you bend over backwards sometimes. And I feel like, for me, I feel like eventually you've got to come to the place where you say, okay, enough is enough, and let's have a judgment. I think that judgment ultimately in Scripture is going to come. So that's my beating the drum.
And just to extend your analogy, it's almost like they're saying, let's give the ears and the arms, and to one part, and we'll give the legs and the torso to the other. And what ends up is we're fighting over the head now. And it's killing the baby. It's a powerful analogy.
So let me tell you what I did, and this is actually, if we can take a moment here just to do a little ministry minute. One of the things I did this year was I was invited to write for Breaking Israel News, and this was one of the first couple articles I wrote. And the title of the article, and I'm actually going to post it again when we put this up for on BFAinternational.com. I'm going to post the article when we do Prophet Pearls. It was called "Don't Cut the Baby in Two," and I was addressing this whole issue of what they call the two-state solution, which I think is not a solution at all. We can go into that. We can go into depth about that. But what I am committed to doing is continuing when the doors open. Effective doors for ministry, you want to walk through them. And one of the effective doors for ministry was to be able to write. And I think there's probably 7 or 8 articles. And one of the things that's really interesting, there might be 8 or 9 or 10 people that are writing for Breaking Israel News. But one of the things happens is when I'll write an article, the social media aspect of it is amazing. The people that will hear it and they'll share it and they'll hear it and they'll share it, and like literally, this is humbling. Like that article, I think there's like 700 plus shares on one article. And again, it's the power of social media. Now, at the same time, Nehemia, I just have to say that there's also challenges with social media. And one of the things that you and I have been trying to do is individually with our separate ministries, but also together, is to get that information out to people so that they can share it with their friends and share it with their friends. And that's why Prophet Pearls is so exciting. That's why with BFA International, at least for us, this has been a great opportunity, because we have got a chance to every week bring the Word of God, which is in line with the mission, inspiring people around the world to build a biblical foundation for their faith. And what Breaking Israel News is, it says Breaking Israel News from a biblical perspective. So that again fits in with the mission. Most of what you're going to hear, hopefully all of it, is somehow connected to helping people understand the Bible better. So that's BFAinternational.com. Go there, sign up as a free member, and if you're really so moved, before the end of the year, consider being a part of the premium content library. That's going to help us produce even more information that's going to be coming out if we can get the people that will support it.
And of course, my ministry is McCore Hebrew Foundation, and my website, nehemiaswall.com. And I want to invite people to head over to nehemiaswall.com and join what I call the support team. By becoming a member of the support team, it allows me to continue my ministry of empowering people with information to defend the Word of God and build their faith based on ancient Hebrew sources. And it also gives you access to my support team studies that are already changing people's lives. I actually put one out by the time this is aired a couple months ago called The Fundamental Flaw of Judaism. And I was sharing there this revelation I had driving to Roswell, New Mexico, and it had nothing to do with aliens. And I got this really touching email I wanted to share from this woman named Anne. And she wrote, life-changing? That's an understatement. Wow, that explains everything. This was after listening to Fundamental Flaw of Judaism. It says, it's these types of revelations and teachings that gives me an extreme personal confirmation that Yah is giving himself and making himself known. Thanks for being the vessel this time. So I really want to encourage people, go over to nehemiaswall.com. There's literally hundreds of hours of free information there and free teachings. But also, if you really want to go to the next level, then please consider joining the support team, and that will give you access to these support team studies. And then also, both Keith and I, we've got podcasts on iTunes. And actually, I found out that there are these other websites that kind of mirror iTunes if you're not an Apple person. Like, I've gone over to the Samsung Android side, and I can now go with my Samsung and access these things that are like iTunes, and it has the same exact thing. But it really does help if you go to iTunes, if you're an Apple person, and give us a rating to nehemiaswall.com podcast and bfainternational.com podcast. And really, really important, please share these Prophet Pearls every week. We need the people to stand with us on the wall and share it. Get the information out there. I don't know if you realize this, Keith. Well, I know you do, but I don't know if the people realize this. But if you have a large number of people who are following your information on Facebook, Facebook actually charges you money to put your information in front of those people. Like, they first tell you it's free, and then when it actually comes time to send a message out, they'll say, if you really want people to see this, you've got to pay us.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like kind of like this bait and switch thing that Facebook does. And can we talk about the Facebook controversy? Or
well, I mean, I'm still vexed by it, Nehemia.
Can you please? I mean, it happened just this morning, and obviously this is going to be broadcast sometime down the road. But we're pre-recording. I need you to talk about it.
Well, to be honest with you, I really want to stick on this right now because it's really frustrating to me. What you've talked about, bait and switch and what happens in social media. And
now they've graduated to essentially censorship. I mean, it's something I would expect from a fascist regime in the third world. Yeah. That's what Facebook is doing now.
Yeah, so if we can go to 326, because this is going to be the key. On that note, this is the key verse, 326. Then the woman whose child was the living one spoke to the king, for she was deeply stirred over her son, and said, "Oh, my Lord, give her the living child and by no means kill him." And Nehemia, I have to just tell you, when I read that phrase, I was reminded of a really interesting thing that happened, and I want you to consider this as the word of the week. This is really interesting. I want us to go
3 weeks
to
in a
Genesis.
Row, you're choosing.
Well, no, the 3 weeks. No, well, you know what? If this one is too much,
ahead.
Genesis 43:30. I want you to go to Genesis 43:30. We see the same phrase in Genesis 43:30 that we see in 1 Kings when it says deeply stirred. I mean, we could pass over that really quickly. I want to give what the meaning of the word, not the second word, racham. I want to give the first word, which basically, and if you would be willing to look at the whole word, okay? And in fact, why don't we do this? 43:30. Would you read 43:30 in Hebrew, and then I want you to read 1 Kings 3:26 in Hebrew and see if we can hear the same kind of phrase.
Okay, in the verse in Genesis you want?
Yep, 43.
It says, Vayamehel Yosef, and Joseph hurried, Ki nichmeru rachamav al achiv.
There it is, right there. Now read in 1 Kings 3:26.
His mercies were nichmeru to his brother. And it's 26?
Yep, 3:26.
Okay. It says, Ki nichmeru rachameha, for her mercy was, again, nichmeru, nichmar.
Okay, so what is the word nichmeru?
Yeah.
So let's talk about what this word is, because I got kind of excited about this word. Meaning that when
do you have an answer?
I'm wanting to do the word of the week. I mean,
is that
really too much?
I think that's really too advanced.
Okay, it's too advanced.
I'll tell people what it means.
Okay,
and you can and what I love is where we have these words and you get to see the literal meaning. Like there's often a derived, what we call an abstract meaning.
Exactly.
And if you look at the literal meaning, you understand what the abstract meaning is. And so we have a verse in Lamentations 5:10. And there it says, our skin glows like an oven. And let's see. Wow, in the King James it says our skin was black like an oven, which I don't know where they got that. They just made that up. Our skin is hot as an oven in the NIV, and that's probably the closest. Nichmaru, it comes from the word to be hot. And the literal meaning is like an oven. And so nichmaru achamav, or achameha, and for the feminine, is her mercy, her compassion got hot.
So I don't know if people have experienced this. I actually experienced this, and actually experienced this somewhat, Nehemia, even in discussing this issue about the social media, where there's a physical reaction to something that's taking place outside of your body. And in this situation, when she says she was deeply stirred, it's like, you ever get that part where you get warm?
So you're saying Facebook is making you warm?
I'm feeling very, very warm about it today.
Not in a good way, not in a warm, fuzzy way,
not in a good way. But she said she was deeply stirred. And so again, with Joseph, what happens? He sees his brothers, and he can't play the role anymore, and he can't be the guy that's in the behind Pharaoh's Pharaoh's government. He's looking at his flesh and blood, and it moves him. It moves him. It brings him physically. He physically feels it. And when I think about this, I think about that he runs from the room, and then I think about this woman who's hearing her baby, her child, is going to be cut in half. And the response, and this is why I go back to the political issue, the response of the one that's not the mother: let's blow it up. Let's have more terror. Let's knock it down. Let's it's the same spirit. What does she say?
So basically you're saying, like, Hamas that has a war and Gaza is flattened, and they say that's a victory?
It's a victory because they're saying, look, we'd rather that Gaza be destroyed than the child live. And so what does she say? Wow. She says, "Oh Lord, give her the living child and by no means kill him." But the other one says, "He shall be neither mine nor yours." Give us the two-state solution. divide them. We know it's not going to work. Destroy it. So this is I wanted to bring up that verse because the response that we see of Joseph running out of the room is, we don't see her running out of the room, but it's the same response. A deep, hot feeling of compassion that and I believe, lastly, when I look at some people, when I hear their responses of what's happening in Israel, in their eyes and in their voice, I hear that compassion for the land of Israel and for the people of Israel, and they don't want the child to die. And they're willing to sacrifice so the child doesn't die.
Right. And what's the image here of the of this growing hot, like physiologically what's happening? I'm not a doctor, so I hope this is right, but it's my understanding that what's happening is basically there's some kind of release of, I don't know if it's adrenaline or something like that, but then you get blush on your face, your face turns, blood rushes to your face, and you feel this warmth in your face, and that's actually this great image in Lamentations 5:10 again, which is our skin glows like an oven or grows hot like an oven. What's happening is it's the blood is rushing to the face, and this is what's happening with the woman. It's not even a voluntary reaction. It's a completely involuntary physiological reaction to where her mercy is stirred, and her that's the word, the rachameha, and actually the word mercy comes from the word for womb. And here literally the baby came out of the womb. And so you're going to force me to do this as our word of the week. So this is a little.
No, we did this one already.
No. So the nichmaru we're going to do.
Oh, nichmaru.
All right. So this is the word that means to glow or to grow hot.
Folks.
So this is a little advanced. So bear with me, people. Every word in Hebrew has a 3-letter root. The 3-letter root here is kaf mem resh, which is kaf is not kuf, kaf like the backward C. Kaf mem resh, and it's nichmaru. The u in nichmaru is they. The nun is the nifal, which is one of the 7 conjugations of Hebrew. It's a verb form. So it says nichmaru, that they were made hot or to glow. Lachameha, her mercy. So that's the word of the week.
Awesome. And I will say this, Nehemia, I really appreciate you doing that. It is a little bit advanced, but you know what? People getting the information, they can take their time, and little by little, just like you mentioned, the 7 verbal stems. It's like, that's something that people can actually learn. We got to figure out how, and I guess I won't say it, or we'll end up doing another whole project, and we don't have the resources for it right now. But let's do this. So she has this. She has this warm. She has this hot red, whatever we want to call it, feeling. And then what does the king say in 27? Then the king said, "Give the first woman to the living child, and by no means kill him."
Whoa.
But no, I'm reading it in English.
Give the first woman? What?
Give the first woman the living child, and by no means kill him. She is his mother.
Now can you read it in a different translation?
What translation would you like?
Any other that's the NIV, right?
That's the NASB.
Oh, the NASB. Let's try the NIV, see if it gets closer.
327. Let's do it in 327. It says here, then the king gave this ruling: give the living baby to the first woman. Do not kill him. She is his mother.
Okay, so you can read Hebrew. Show me the word in Hebrew that says first woman.
Well, let's see. 327. Then the king said, give us oh boy.
So what it literally says is, and the king answered,
oh boy,
and he said, give her the living child, but don't kill him, for she is his mother. Who is his mother? It doesn't say. And that's the beauty of Solomon's solution of threatening to cut, or saying he's going to cut the baby in half. Anybody who hears this story knows that, doesn't even need Solomon to tell us. Once he does what he does and says cut the baby in half, and the woman responds, we don't even need it to tell us, oh yeah, it was the woman who responded, and her mercy was,
These are called English translation helpers.
Right. So the English translation thought, you're so stupid, I need to tell you that it's the first woman. I'm going to dumb it down for you. Whereas you read it in the Hebrew and you're in awe, because in the Hebrew you're thinking, it doesn't even say which one, and it doesn't need to say, because Solomon gave me the answer. And now the answer is obvious. And that's the really powerful, brilliant things that people come up with, are the things that afterwards you look back and it's just completely obvious. Wow.
Well, I will tell you this. I mean, I don't know if you know it or not, Nehemia. I'm really a little bit concerned because we're only at let's see here.
53 minutes.
Only at 53 minutes. It's supposed to be 45 minutes, but in 45 minutes to an hour. But let's keep on going, because we get to go to 4:1.
Yeah.
And it says, when all Israel heard of the judgment which the king had handed down, they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to do what?
To do judgment is what it says.
To do judgment.
So literally it says, and all Israel heard the judgment which the king had judged, and they feared the king, or were in awe of the king, for they saw that the chokhmat Elohim, the wisdom of God, was in him to do judgment. So this again is this idea of the king as the judge. That's one of the main roles of the king. And can I talk for a minute about this idea, chokhmat Elohim, the wisdom of God?
Yes.
That's a really powerful statement, that Solomon had the wisdom of God. And let's jump ahead real quick, and I'll try to go through this quickly. 1 Kings 5, 9-14, we have this great description of Solomon's wisdom. And it says there, 1 Kings 5, 9-14. It's not working for me. Okay, here we go. It says, Yehovah endowed Solomon with wisdom and discernment in great measure, with understanding as vast as the sands on the seashore. Solomon's wisdom was greater than the wisdom of all the Kedemites, that's the people of the east, and greater than all the wisdom of the Egyptians. He was the wisest of all men, wiser than Eitan the Ezrachite and Haman and Chalkol and Darda and a bunch of other smart people. His fame spread among all the surrounding nations. He composed 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. Now that's not 3,000 books of proverbs, but like single or two-sentence little statements that are proverbs. His songs numbered 1,005. He discoursed about trees, from the cedar in Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the wall. And he discoursed about beasts, birds, creeping things, and fishes. And people hear that and they're like, what? He was talking about animals. And what happened in ancient Israel is people would give these parables having to do with animals. We have a great example of the parable of Jotham, where Jotham, wants to talk about political leadership, and instead he talks about, cedars and bushes and things like that. So Solomon did, thousands of those. Men of all peoples came to hear Solomon's wisdom, sent by all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. So Solomon is this really, really wise guy. It's telling us in 1 Kings 5. And then, he's really a unique character in the Bible. And the reason I say that is Solomon is involved in 7 different books, and he's mentioned in more. But so we have him obviously in 1 Kings and the parallel in 1 Chronicles. But then we also have the book of Proverbs. Now, I don't know if people realize this. Solomon didn't write the entire book of Proverbs. Chapters 30 and 31 are from different sages whose names are given, so we know who they are. But chapters 1 through 9 is one collection of the writings of the Proverbs of Solomon. Chapters 10 to 24 is a second collection of the Proverbs of Solomon. And I'm not making this up. Look, it says it actually will tell you, the Proverbs of Solomon in chapter 10. And then 25 to 29 is a third collection, which was collected at the time of Hezekiah, we're told, of the Proverbs of Solomon. And then we have the book of Ecclesiastes, which doesn't mention Solomon by name, but is usually understood to be referring to Solomon. And the reason that it's understood to be Solomon is that he's the king over Jerusalem, and he's the richest, and he is the wisest, and well, who else could it be? And Kohelet actually is not a name. Kohelet is a title, and it means the preacher, or the one who gathers a community to preach. You're the Kohelet here. And then we have Song of Songs, which is, we're told explicitly, is Solomon. And then we have 2 psalms that he wrote, or are at least attributed to him. Psalm 72 and 127. So I mean, think about it. Other than Moses, who do we have that is such a prolific writer in the Bible? Where's the book that David wrote? We don't have it. I really think, off the top of my head, I'm pretty sure that he is the most prolific writer of someone whose name we know after Moses. And so that really makes him a unique character. And it's interesting because we talked about the division of knowledge into 3 realms. We talked about this. It's in Jeremiah and Ezekiel, and it talks about in ancient Israel there was 3 realms of knowledge. There was Torah, which was taught by the Kohen, meaning instruction. There was a word or vision, which is taught by the prophet, we call prophecy. And the third one is wisdom, which is taught by the elder or the sage. And Solomon is of the third category, the sage. And that's why Kohelet, Ecclesiastes in English, and Song of Songs and Proverbs, 3 of his books, and the 2 Psalms he wrote, are all in this section, the third section of the prophets, what they call today the writings, but really it's a section of the wisdom. Wow. Divine wisdom.
It's interesting. 1 Kings 4:1 says, now King Solomon was king over all Israel. That's how it ends. But what's interesting to me, when I read that, I'm actually reminded of of prophet pearls. Of Torah pearls. I'm sorry, I get these things so confused. I think other people get it confused too. There's confusion about season 1s and season 2s and prophet pearls and Torah pearls.
But when we
did it, the original Torah pearls, that section that we talked about, why was this selected? It's talking about Joseph, who also became one who was very wise. And it's really interesting. The story of Solomon, he's having this dream and God speaks to him, in the story of Joseph. And there's basically the dream that the Pharaoh, and he goes and he interprets it and ends up being the one who has the wisdom to know how to not only extend the life of those that were in Egypt, but for all of Israel. And when I read those parallels, and I hope people will do this, they'll go to nehemiaswall.com, they'll go to bfainternational.com and listen to the original Torah Pearls. Listen to Prophet Pearls if you haven't listened to the ones before. And then every once in a while we'll do something special. Like I'm going to add this article that got me in major trouble called Don't Cut the Baby in Two. I'm actually going to put that at the bfainternational.com listing of Prophet Pearls.
Yeah, we'll post that on nehemiaswall.com.
Also, but if there's anything else, Nehemia, I mean, we're oh boy, 1 hour exactly.
Wow.
Anything else?
Can I just end with? No, I do have to share some other things. So Solomon really is a special character. That did you know that Solomon is the son of God? Well, can I share that with people? I did something really controversial, but for me it wasn't controversial. But people came up to me after and said, "What did you do? Did you convert to Christianity?" I prayed a prayer. We were preaching in a tent in the high desert of California, and I'd actually literally preached through a pair of shoes.
I'm going to try to get him to stop here. I mean, Nehemia, you're going to really tell what happened?
I'm going to share what happened. So I was preaching in the high desert of California, and you were there too, and you were also preaching. And I prayed a prayer, and I asked Yehovah to. I said, Yehovah, I want to know who the one you've chosen as the Messiah. I want to know his name, and I asked Yehovah to reveal to me his son, and I have no problem praying that prayer because to me, the King of Israel will be the Son of God. There's no question about that in my mind. And I can bring you chapter and verse that the King of Israel is the Son of God. 1 Chronicles 28:6. And here God says, he said to me, it will be your son. This is actually David telling Solomon what Yehovah revealed to him. Yehovah said to David, he said to me, it will be your son Solomon who will build my house and my courts, for I have chosen him to be a son to me, and I will be a father to him. And I look forward to the time very soon when the King of Israel, who will be Yehovah's son, and Yehovah will be his father, will sit on his throne, and the people will beat their swords into plowshares and bring peace to the whole world. And that man, Solomon, we're told in 2 Samuel 12:25, he was Yedidyah, the friend of Yah, the one who was friends, beloved of Yehovah. And this is my prayer, Yehovah. I'll end in prayer. Avinu Shabashamayim, Father in heaven, you chose Israel as a nation to be your son, and you are our father, and it is our chosen role. Our duty is to teach your word to the nations, to be a nation of priests, a holy nation, and a Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And Yehovah, we look forward to the time, may it be very soon, when the one you've chosen as your son, he sits on the throne of David, and he brings peace to the world. And he ends this conflict. He ends the conflict of the two people who come before you and say, this is my land, and the other says, this is my land. And the one wants to cut the land in half, and the other doesn't even know what to do. He wants to, okay, let them cut it, and, we're not going to kill it. Yehovah, please, give us that time when the wolf will lie down with the lamb, and there'll be peace. Peace for your city, Jerusalem, for your people, Israel, and for all of those who you've gathered to your covenant, for that remnant, the remnant from the fire that will remain, that will be loyal among the nations to your name and to your word. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for listening to Prophet Pearls with Nehemia Gordon and Keith Johnson. For more information, please visit nehemiaswall.com and bfainternational.com.